Okay, welcome back to members of 121 Community Church in Grapevine, Texas, and our ongoing study in Climacus and the Ladder of Divine Ascent. We're going to take a look at steps 9, 10, 11, and 12. They'll be pages 125 to 132. So very little amount was given to each step here. It's 4 very brief steps. Let's go to block 1 and take a look at 9 and 10. We begin by negating remembrance of wrongs. The virtues bear us up to heaven. Anger feeds on the remembrance of being wronged, and that must be negated. Victory over this sin comes through restored fellowship, and that happens by remembering the sufferings of Christ for us. Then we can reach and desire true repentance. Yes, we may have been wronged, but we are to reach forgiveness by remembering the forgiveness we received through the sufferings of Christ, and then we can restore fellowship instead of remembering how we've been wronged. Then 10, negate slander. Slander is born out of the remembrance of being wronged. It is hatred. It must be negated through prayer, because we don't really know the heart of another in the same way that Christ does, so we don't have a right to slander others. Do not judge the sins of others. Examine your own sins. Judging others ruins your own soul. It deforms or defigures your soul. The Pharisees were guilty of this very sin. So steps 9 and 10 in block 1 were all about negation, steps of negation, what we need to get rid of. Negate the remembrance of being wronged. Move on to forgiveness. Move on to restored fellowship. Negate words of slander, speaking negatively about someone. Move beyond that to forgiveness and restored fellowship. Let's move on to steps 11 and 12 in block 2. They also address speech. Step 11. Vainglory talk is a sinful display, but hesychia, inner stillness, is prayerful, becoming a knowing of the self. Silence draws us near to God. In enlightenment, vainglory will then become defeated. Do not sin with words of vainglory. Seek hesychia, inner stillness. Pride is a root sin of so many other sins, and it can be the root sin of vainglory speech. We negate it by taking up hesychia, inner stillness, which is the prayer of unceasing prayer. Now, step 12 is negation of lying. Lying destroys love and denies God Himself. It is hypocrisy. It is falsehood. Fear of the Lord will forsake lying. It's spurred on by a strong conscience and by our desire to seek the divine good. If we are truly seeking the divine good and praying unceasingly, we will not deny God. We will not take up the falsehood of lying. And we will not fall into the trap of prideful, vainglory speech. So again, 11 and 12 are steps of negation on the ladder. We have 4 steps of negation here. They do include within them the affirmation of affirming hesychia, inner stillness, but basically it's 4 steps of negation. Negate remembrance of wrongs. Negate slander. Negate vain-gloried speech. Negate lying. So obviously, if you go to block 3, our conclusive triad is going to begin with negation. Let go of that memory of being wronged. And then affirmation. Instead affirm hesychia, inner stillness. That will lead you to forgive others. Then you will reach koinonia. In the Greek, that is fellowship. Restored fellowship is a gift of God's divine goodness. So our conclusive triad is negation of being wronged, affirmation of hesychia, inner stillness, resulting in koinonia, restored fellowship, and that is the goal, to reach a restored fellowship. So 4 steps of negation, and 1 step included within those 4 negative negations is the affirmation of hesychia, inner stillness, in order to reach restored fellowship. You got to pass through that prayer of hesychia, inner stillness, in order to do that, because you have to pass through prayer to develop that willingness to forgive. Because in prayer, you will remember the sufferings of Christ that were necessary for your forgiveness. And then by remembering the sacrifice of Christ in prayer and contemplation, then we can move on to forgiving others, and then next we can restore fellowship. So we get great additional teaching here on 4 steps of negation. Negate remembrance of wrongs. Negate slander. Negate vainglory speech. Negate lying. Affirm hesychia, inner prayerful contemplation. And then posit and bring about and work toward restored fellowship. Bring about that necessary restored fellowship. The goal of these 4 steps of the ladder are to reach restored fellowship. In that way, you serve God's kingdom. In that way, you ascend the ladder of sanctification. It is a ladder of sanctification. It is only climbed by remembering from the Gospel of John that we are sanctified because Christ is sanctifying himself at the right hand of the Father. Through his sanctification, we are sanctified. Through his faithfulness, we are justified. So we ascend the ladder by remembering Christ. We ascend the ladder by remembering the sacrifice and the sufferings of Christ. Remember the sufferings of Christ. Then we know that we have been forgiven much, and we can forgive others. And it's all about, all 4 of these steps begin with the fact that we feel we've been wronged. Well, if you feel you've been wronged, and maybe you have been wronged, then the instructions from Climacus are, don't seek revenge. Don't try to retaliate. Don't answer sin with sin. Instead, take up these 4 steps of negation, thereby moving through prayerful contemplation to reach restored fellowship. And that will wrap up pages 125 to 132, steps 9 through 12, 4 steps of negation, which include the step of affirming hesychia, inner stillness, to reach restored fellowship.